Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Adam Balderstone for another episode of Bedrock and Balderstone, and we are talking about I, Claudius, episode 4, Poison is Queen. This is part of our ongoing series where we're working our way through I, Claudius, and we're not quite at the halfway mark yet, so we're sort of, this is really kind of, I feel like the first 4 episodes have really been kind of setting the stage for a lot of the drama that's going to come. I mean, we've gotten a lot of drama leading up to it, but this is where the show becomes quite meaty. And in Poison is Queen, it's the episode where Augustus, who's had the wool pulled over his eyes for so many years about Livia and all of the things that she's doing, behind the scenes to place Tiberius on the throne, where he begins to realize that she isn't, she may not have his best interests in mind, and maybe not even the best interests of Rome in mind, and that she's been plotting against people like Postumus, for many years now. And this is brought to his attention by Germanicus after Claudius relays the info to him in a meeting, basically telling him what Postumus said to him the night that he was arrested. And Augustus, at first it seems he might be righting this ship, but by the end of the episode, Livia is able to find a way to poison him. He goes through great effort to restrict her ability to get poison into his food. He starts I think by the end of the episode he is only eating figs that he's picked off the tree himself. And Livia, if I recall, I think later in the series we learned that she had painted poison onto the figs individually, but the implication is pretty apparent in the episode. And so Augustus dies, and Tiberius is placed on the throne, and Livia also changes Augustus's will, because the steps he was taking to right the ship involved changing his will so that Postumus would be his new heir, and she changes it so that Tiberius basically gets 2/3 of his estate and she gets 1/3, and then the Senate votes to have him replace Augustus. And that's and also in this episode we get introduced to Sejanus. At this point he's just kind of a lackey for Livia, though he becomes much more down the road. But she sends him on an assignment to kill Postumus, and then to kill I think Fabius Maximus was a friend of Augustus who he had killed. And so Adam, what did you think of the episode?
It's a great episode. I mean, you brought up, how Augustus almost rights the ship, and it's one of those things where, even though I've seen this episode before, I've seen the series before, and I know the history behind it, there was still part of me suckered into thinking that, maybe it would work this time. It's just a mark of a good series when it can create suspense about something you already know the outcome to. It's I think this episode pulled it off. And I mean, it is an interesting turning point in the series, because obviously horrible things have been happening through this entire series, but it's been Livia working in the background, secretly doing her things behind the scenes. And it's like, this is kind of the point where the power has shifted now, and now Livia's put Tiberius on the throne. There's no Augustus as this person she has to work around, or anything. It is a major shift in the series.
And it's interesting though to see where Livia ends up, as we go forward. But that's obviously other episodes, so I guess we won't dive into that right now. Another thing that's sort of, I guess, important but minor in this episode that I noticed is this is really where I think Livia's perception of Claudius begins to change a lot. In fact, it's where everybody's perception of Claudius really begins to shift. Augustus does, because Germanicus explains to him that he learned this from Claudius, and he tells him more about Claudius. Augustus comes to Claudius, and there's that whole scene where he's sort of trying to write everything, and one of the things that he's doing is trying to sort of build a bridge with Claudius, and make it clear that he realizes now that he can trust Claudius.
Of course, the classic fatal line of "We'll talk a lot more when I get back." Yeah. That's always the mark of doom.
But Livia also has a moment where initially when she like clearly Augustus has been figuring out a lot of the stuff that she's up to, and so she wants to know, well, who's the source. And at first she thinks that it's Livia, so she accuses Livia of going to him and telling him about Posthumus, and then Livia points the finger at her brother Claudius.
Yeah, which was a real charitable act on her part.
You get. I don't think it's quite addressed explicitly in the show, but you do get the impression that they're not the best of friends as brothers and sisters go. But initially, Livia dismisses Claudius. She's like, "Oh, he's an idiot." But then she gets this look on her face, and she doesn't. She's talking about one thing, but it's clear she's also talking about Claudius, and she says, "Well, maybe we've been mistaken here," and so she sort of holds the idea in abeyance. But by the end of the episode, it's clear that she has a lot more interest in Claudius than she previously did, and they have a really interesting scene where there's this thing that occurs in the episode, and this kind of ties to the thing that I've been talking about, where how one of the things I like about the show is how it treats Roman magic as kind of a real thing from time to time. It's sort of, and so there's this this event where lightning strikes the sea in Caesar's name on I think on Mars Field or something like that, and Livia tells Augustus that it means he has 100 days to live, and this is obviously part of she's getting that in his head because she's poisoning him, and she thinks if he knows he's going to die, that he'll die more easily. But his friend Fabius Maximus says, well, why not 100 weeks or 100 months, or why doesn't it mean that you'll live to be 100? But later in the episode, when Augustus is dead and Tiberius is assuming power, Livia wants to make Augustus a god, and she asks Claudius what he thinks, and he says, well, it's been foretold, and the sea in he references the same thing that Augustus references, and he says that when the lightning struck the sea, and if you remove sea from Caesar, what's left is Iser, and in Etruscan that means God, and so clearly he has to be made into a god. And she dismisses the argument, saying, well, if Jupiter wanted to talk to us in he would do so in Latin. He wouldn't do it in Etruscan. But she still makes a point of telling him to mention it to Tiberius because he still can use every good argument that he needs. Yeah,
it's useful. Exactly. It's Livia. It's the classic Livia thing. It's like she thinks it's completely idiotic, which is fair enough, but she's still like, well, that's practical though. Go ahead and say that.
and also, I'm pretty sure that like very little is known of actual Etruscan language. Like I think that's one of the big mysteries actually in history. I'm not so boned up on it, but I remember encountering that a lot. So I suspect he's just kind of able to make up whatever he needs to make up for plot convenience.
I forget at what point Etruscan's pretty much lost. So it's possible that there may have been some knowledge around at this time, but it's clearly pretty much gone now.
Oh well, I mean the writer Robert Graves was able to make up whatever.
Yeah, of course. I'm sorry. I think you're talking about Claudius.
No. I think we're supposed to believe that Claudius has a firm grasp of Etruscan. That's one of the plot points. It's also interesting that this is an episode where she says where Livia talks to him about a book that he's writing, that he's supposed to give a presentation. He was going to give some kind of public reading on. And it's about the change of religion during the time of Augustus, which was interesting to me because that's just the kind of book that a modern historian would tend to write, So, but yeah. So other things that happened in the episode, obviously Augustus and Livia, their relationship is changing dramatically, and Augustus goes to visit Posthumus, and there's that, and so this is one of the last times we're obviously going to see Posthumus, but it was sort of an interesting scene where he goes there and there's a lot of tension, and there's a line that I kind of like. I don't know why, but basically Augustus sees him and is kind of horrified at how how feeble he looks, I guess. And how you see, and he says, "What did you expect? A jolly fat man full of laughs and jokes." And I just like just something about the way he says it. I like that. But the important thing that I think happens in this scene is we've seen Augustus cry here many times in the series, but here he cries again when Posthumus blames him for everything that's happening, and it's interesting to me, number one, because the character of Augustus, he sort of admits here, like, he cries freely, and it's an interesting character trait for someone like Augustus to have in a show like this. But number two, I think two people cry this episode, Augustus and Tiberius. And Tiberius cries in a rage when he's complaining about Posthumus being made when Livia tells him about the change to the will, and Tiberius kind of goes on a tirade, and at the end of it he's weeping as he's wagging his finger and screaming, and so I thought it was kind of an interesting juxtaposition, even though the scenes happen quite apart from each other, because in Augustus's weeping you sort of see his humanity, and in Tiberius's weeping you see all of the terrifying things that are going to unfold over the course of his reign.
I like the scene with Posthumus and Augustus. It was a very well done scene with a lot of interesting back and forth there. Posthumus just being bitter about the whole thing, even as Augustus is trying to make amends. That worked very well for me.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, and also it was important because it really gave more impact to the scene when Sejanus goes there and kills him.
Yeah,
and also just the ruthlessness with which, I mean, he just, it's very, I don't know what the right word is for it, but there's something unique about the way Sejanus kills him. It's almost like it's a fairly meaningless act to Sejanus, and I feel like in most shows you'd get some amount of protest from Posthumus in that scene to sort of see it from Posthumus's perspective, but I feel like we're really seeing that scene from Sejanus's perspective almost. You know what I mean? Like it's just he just
slaughters him like a sheep. Basically.
And he calls him it. He doesn't even say he. He says, "Take it outside, weigh it down with a stone." It's just this very cold, I thought a very effective scene. Because even though up to this point Posthumus has been an important character, and you would expect there to be almost like a struggle or something, it's just, nope, they just go in and kill him. And there's another important scene where Livia speaks with the chief Vestal, Camilla Pulchra, I think her name was, and I don't know. Number one, it's interesting because it sort of shows Livia, at her best, manipulating somebody, but she basically she has made this kind of a promise to the chief Vestal that she's going to try to help her to get the House of the Vestals rebuilt through the Senate by persuading Augustus. And she tells her that Augustus is, he's like every other man. He makes all these promises and he never delivers. And so one of the sort of additional duties of the Vestals, in addition to keeping the flame, is they maintain a lot of wills and things like that. So they have Augustus's will, and she basically says, I think Augustus might have put a sum of money aside for me in his will that he intends for me to use to rebuild the House of the Vestals. Perhaps we can take a peek at it. And slowly over the course of the conversation, she corrupts this Vestal, who have their vow is infamous, and she even says in the scene, it would be a violation of my vow to open up the will, but she convinces her by basically saying, well, if it's not in there, I'll give you the money either way. And so she's able to change she's able to get around all of Augustus's efforts, which are many over the course of the episode. But
it's interesting too, because Livia also always has this kind of threatening air too. It's like it's like, I mean, she does win her over with the promise of money, but it also she creates a situation where it becomes very difficult for her to turn it down too. It's like, there isn't. I don't think there's any actual spoken threat, but there is just this menacing air about Livia at the
Yeah.
same time. It's like, hey, I'm offering here, take this big bag of money, or something horrible will happen
Yeah,
to
no,
you.
I think
Kind of
that's
feeling.
definitely because there's a look on the Vestal's face where
Yes,
she's
exactly.
clearly trying to think of like, how do I get out of this? And you can tell she's like, there's no way for me to refuse this, because if I do, something bad is going to happen.
Yeah,
And
it would be a different scene. Because I mean, you could do the exact same dialogue and play it with her being a corrupt, greedy person who's like, "Ooh, yeah, I'll take the money." You can have the dialogue the same, but the performance shows something different.
well, and because all Livia has to do is say to Augustus, "Hey, that Chief Vestal has violated her vow," and that it's a
Yeah,
horrible end for her. So,
yeah,
um, but also we learn in the scene that Livia has access to Augustus's seal, so that'll make it easy for them to open the will and reseal it. And so,
Mhm.
uh, and there's and at this the end scene that I was talking about where she talks with Claudius, there's that, when Claudius first goes in, she says, where have they got to? And he says, oh, they're reading Augustus's will. And she says, oh, that's what they think. And so we really see Livia in like peak villainy in this episode.
yeah,
um,
yeah.
but I think the most important thing, or the most significant sort of character thing with Livia, is she poisons and kills Augustus,
Hmm.
which is, I mean, and it's drawn out. It's a very, it sort of shows, it treats poisoning in the way that is, sort of, it's not this thing where she just slips something into his drink once and he dies. It's an ongoing process. And so
Yeah.
initially she starts poisoning him, but he's able to get himself a cow and milk him, make his own milk from the cow, and eat fruit from his garden, so that he does, he just he stops eating anything that's been touched by other people. He says it can't be touched by a human hand. And so the only way that she's able to poison him is when she realizes he's eating the figs, and then she does so. But what did you think of the death scene, and just as she's poisoning, we have this scene of her drinking copious amounts of wine.
Yeah, yeah, there is the one scene. Well, I'll get to that later. But yeah, the death scene though is it's pretty much straight horror. It's a very horrifying scene where Augustus is essentially paralyzed from the poison, just lying there, listening to Livia as he's dying, and there's just nothing he can do, and the life just kind of goes out of him as we're watching, and that is a very dark scene.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more interesting ones, and it really kind of, I don't know, like the number one, the acting, the
Hmm.
acting on Brian Blessed's part when he's dying is, I think, pretty, for a scene where he has no lines, and being a guy who's kind of famous for the volume of his voice. It's sort of interesting to watch that, sort of a much more subdued performance. Um,
Yeah,
but
and it's Livia basically being completely open with him, basically for the first time in the
mhm.
whole series. It's like he's dying, and she can just say everything right now.
Yeah, and she reveals a lot, and I think we got much greater window into her motivation, but I think we also continue to get a lot of confusing signals, because she's clearly crying as well when Tiberius comes in, and they look like real tears, but maybe she's just such a
I I don't
skilled
know.
poisoner
What
that.
what I thought she did is she put her hand on Augustus's eyes at some point. I mean, I thought she was like stealing his tears, and
Oh,
then she touches her eyes.
I didn't
It's
notice that.
Yeah, she touches his eyes, then she touches hers, and then she's got tears. It's like I thought it was her
Okay, I'm gonna
stealing.
before next episode, remind me that we need to go back and watch that scene, because I've
Okay,
seen this show a million times and I never noticed that, and that really
yeah.
would change a lot in my mind if that's the case. Um, but I want to see it again. I want to confirm it.
Yeah, definitely. Go back and take a look.
But but also she's drinking heavily, and so
Yeah,
like
she starts
drinking.
drinking it when she realizes Augustus is onto her. Is where we get that scene of her. I think is it during the scene with
Well,
Tiberius she's drinking a lot.
no, well, it is, and it's an interesting scene for that reason. But also, the scene where she's drinking is right after we see Augustus in bed, suffering the effects of the poison. And so,
Yeah,
my interpretation of that was we're meant to wonder: is she drinking because she's suffering through the process of poisoning him, or is she drinking because she's worried about how this is gonna like? This is obviously the most important act that she's performing in her overall plan, and so
yeah,
maybe it's nerves, but
yeah,
I feel like you're meant to sort of wonder. I mean, obviously she was honest to him in that scene, but if you roll back to the scene with Postumus and Augustus, he knows she's doing all these things, and he basically knows she's trying to poison him, and even with all that knowledge, he says to Postumus, like, when you've been married to a woman for that long, it's like losing your right arm. And so he still can't. He's still just trying to keep her at arm's length to protect himself, but he can't. I mean, all he would have to do is have her sent to an isle and exiled like anybody else, but he won't take that step with her. And so I guess what my question is there any reciprocation of that on Livia's part, or is she drinking mainly because she's just worried about her plot being exposed?
yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, there's the whole line about her, never forgetting, her family as opposed to, who she is, and she thinks that Augustus tended to forget that himself. It's that was an interesting line.
Yeah, no, and I mean, obviously, I think her father was like on the other side of the Civil War, so I think that was. I know
Hmm.
there were enemies at one point. We know that, and so, and she kind of, I mean, she kind of clearly lays out that she's, that's an, that he was sort of like he was able to kind of overlook that, but she hasn't been able to overlook it, maybe. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I think, but yeah, so I don't know uh, what was it? Oh, but the scene where she was drunk with Tiberius, that was an interesting scene because she was drunk. Because I feel like in that scene she was being exceptionally truthful, to both.
Yeah.
Because she's actually in that scene. First, she speaks to Claudius, and then she speaks to Tiberius, and in the whole scene, she's basically like threatening to take off his head. She's just like she's really digging into him in threatening ways, and he just keeps saying, "Thank you, grandmother. Thank you, grandmother." And then Tiberius shows up, and Claudius kind of stumbles out, and Tiberius has a line like, "That grandson of yours could wreck the empire simply by strolling through it." And but then that's when she tells Tiberius that Augustus has altered his will, and she takes great delight in seeing Tiberius's reaction to that, which culminates in him pointing his finger at her and weeping, and just being at the end of his rope, basically. But by the end of the scene, she tells him to travel to Illyricum slowly, and that's when we know that she's like really sort of laying down, like, this is like the final step in her in her in her in her plan. But one of the things, but when she first tells Tiberius that Augustus has changed his will, she lets him guess, who's been made the new heir, and he guesses Germanicus. And she says, "Trust you to get it wrong. I must have been nodding when I gave birth to you." And I mean, she's been cruel to him before, but I feel like the drunk Livia is especially cruel.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
She.
also, it's clear that Tiberius doesn't know nearly as like, he's still a little bit in ignorance of all the things exactly that Livia has been up to, because he says to her when she's talking about Augustus kind of being more onto her, he's like, he says like, what could he know? What is there to know? But he's very grave when he says that last line. He's very grave and accusatory.
It's an interesting line because I'm not sure if it indicates he doesn't know or if it just indicates that he knows but he wants her to say it, or it's a difficult line to interpret. It could go either way.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he's got to know some of the stuff that's going on, but maybe he just doesn't know the vast extent of it. It's a little difficult to say.
Yeah.
But I thought that again that was a pretty interesting scene, and yeah. So I feel like by the end of this episode, though, everything is very well set up. Even the stuff with Caligula, the groundwork has been laid for, even though it's not totally apparent. But like all the stuff with Germanicus is very important to pay attention to because a lot of the stuff that happens with Caligula is off camera, and so you really kind of need to have Germanicus in your head by the time we get there. And so I quite like how they've really set up a lot of these plot points. But what we're really getting into now isn't so much that as the upcoming Sejanus stuff, which is where where I think the show really kind of, number one, it's worthy of comment. This is our first introduction to Sejanus this episode, and he's played by Patrick Stewart. And the thing I love about watching Patrick Stewart play Sejanus, and I know I've talked about this before, is that it's basically like watching an evil Picard. It's a very evil character for Patrick Stewart to be playing, and in a lot of ways he kind of plays him similar to Jean-Luc Picard. Like there's a lot of similarities between Sejanus and Jean-Luc Picard, but Sejanus is thoroughly evil, and so it's just an interesting thing to observe, and we'll get more of that as the episode goes. But I don't know what are your feelings going into the next episodes now after all this?
Yeah, I'm excited moving into the next episode. It's not like I was in any way sick of what's happening in the show, but it's like we're moving into a different movement of the show right now, and it's kind of exciting to move on to that fresh thing. Like I said, it's the overall arc of the show so far has been Livia doing all these manipulations behind the scene of Augustus's reign, and now Augustus's reign is over, and we're into completely fresh ground on the series right now in a lot of ways. So I'm excited to get into that change.
I feel like the middle of the show is the best. Like episode, like I'm just looking at the episode list. Like episodes 5 to 9 are where I really think that you get the most enjoyment out of the series. The whole series is good, but that's just like you just have some of the most memorable moments occurring over the course of those episodes, and it's also where just a lot of the drama is the most interesting, I think. We'll see as we go. Again, we're gonna what is it? It's our next episode is when it's
we're going for a Wednesday.
I think Wednesday probably, and we'll play it by ear, obviously, but so we'll probably be back in a couple of days with another discussion, and we'll be covering some justice, which again is where things definitely get quite interesting. And also, some justice is an important episode to pay attention to because it's one that has reverberations for a few episodes, and you want to remember some of the details. But yeah, so again, people, let us know what you think if you have any thoughts on the show. Hopefully we're covering everything and we're remembering everything from the episodes. It's a really rich program, though, so I feel like it's very difficult to do it justice in a conversation.
It is. I feel this one was a little more direct than a lot of the episodes. I mean, I haven't had quite as much to say, not because it is in any way a bad episode, but it is more a very strong drive, towards Augustus finding this out and being destroyed before he can do anything about it. It feels a little more specific than some of the episodes, but but yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me to put into words. But
No,
yeah,
I agree with you. This episode does feel different than a lot of the episodes. I think it feels different largely because it's a focused episode. It's a very important episode, so they
yeah.
really devote much of the attention to the to the death of Augustus. And I mean that's a long scene. That scene where he's dying feels
Yeah.
excruciatingly long. The poisoning is very dragged out, so it's kind of the pacing of this episode feels a little bit tighter, I think, than some of the other episodes, maybe.
Yeah.
And but it works. It works. And yeah, so either way, we'll again, the name of the episode is "Poison is Queen," and this is the I, Claudius television series. Obviously, if you're listening to this, we assume you know about it. But if you don't, for whatever reason,
if you just turned the dial and joined us, then
but if for whatever reason, if you don't, it's definitely worth checking out. I think this is
it's a fantastic show.
And without fail, everybody I speak to who has seen the series tells me that it's like it's usually, you don't usually get like this sort of lukewarm, oh yeah, I enjoyed that was good. Usually it's like, oh no, that had an impact on me, like that was I remember watching that with my aunt or my mom or my father, and this was like a meaningful show to me. It's not usually just something that it's one of these, like, to me, I feel like it's like one of these once in a generation shows that you get that just has this this is something special about all the ingredients.
Yeah, I mean, to back your statement up, I was taking a painting class today, and I was sitting next to a woman, and it came up that I was reviewing I, Claudius. She's like, "Oh, I absolutely loved that show," and I'm like, "Oh, well, it's on Acorn." She's like, "I'm going to go home and watch it." She was just so excited that it was online.
Yeah.
And
in fact,
like that was just like a random person. So
no, it always seems to be the reaction. I very rarely encounter somebody who's kind of like, you just never get that response to it. And even people who normally wouldn't be interested in Rome. But like you said, it's available on Amazon and on Acorn, on the Acorn channel. So that would be a way for people to watch it. You could get the free trial, watch I, Claudius, and leave it to you if you want to continue with Acorn or not after that. But it's but that is a way to view it. I have the Acorn DVD, which I like. I also have the I forget what company it was, but the previous DVD, and the if you still have a VHS player, the old VHS tapes are pretty good too.
Yeah, and I think another thing to say, just as a positive, to encourage people to watch the show if they've gotten this many episodes and haven't started, but it's just the fact that this is a show that I think a lot of times with old shows you kind of have to watch them as part of their time, and like, oh well, this was 70s TV or whatever, but it's like this is in a lot of ways what a lot of modern shows are trying to do. It's just this really fantastic story told in a season. And it's like a precursor of like something like Game of Thrones and stuff like that. It's very popular now.
It definitely is. And I think also one of the other reasons why it holds up is it's not doing anything exceptional in terms of the it's all basically a stage production. Like this could have been done on stage, and so that is that will stand the test of time. They're not relying on special effects, and and it's pretty much all dialogue. There's not tremendous call for action in this show. Every once in a while somebody maybe tries to stab another person, and there's but even those scenes are very stagey in their presentation. So I think it all holds up quite well. And I should say, when I first watched this, I got it at the library, and I just went and I picked up, I forget, whatever the max was, that's how many I took out, and I would watch them and come back and then get the rest of them. And I think I got to believe that if libraries are still doing DVDs and VHSs, that I, Claudius is one of the likely things to be there. So that's another possibility if people want to see it.
And they are. So they are still doing that. So definitely go check it out at the library.
Okay. So we will let you go, and we will be back on with another episode, and we'll be back on this Friday with another episode of Wuxia Weekend. I can't recall off the top of my head what movie we're doing, but it is going to be an Alexander Fusheng film. So it'll be part of that
Drawing a
theme.
blank on the title too, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's in the tip of my tongue, but I just can't remember it right now. And yeah, so we'll be back on. And also this week I'm going to do a follow-up where me and Joel are on Wuxia Workshop covering the Brave Archer series. And so we're doing one episode at a time. And we're on episode 2 now. So we'll be covering that. And I think that's an interesting discussion. Adam, as you can tell, is familiar with it, and we cover.
I've actually got that queued up in a tab right now. I've been very busy the last few days, but I love those movies, and so I'm really excited. When I saw you guys were doing that, I'm like, oh, I gotta listen to this episode.
Yeah,
I looked it up by Deadly Breaking Sword is the movie we're doing this Friday.
Okay, so we'll be doing Deadly Breaking Sword. And then we have a vote on what the next movie after that will be, but and so we'll announce that at the appropriate time. And I believe we're ending on 8 Diagram Pole Fighter, which I'm really happy about. I think number one, I believe next month is going to be Kara Hui month, anyways, and so 8 Diagram Pole Fighter, it stars Alexander Fusheng and Kara Hui, and Kara Hui actually picks up his role he died during production, and she picks up a lot of the story that he would have had to carry. So it's kind of an interesting transition into the next month. But yeah, so we'll let you go, and we will talk to you later.